Hey there everybody, it's Nathan Cole with nathancolephoto.com, and in this tutorial I'm going to show how you can use luminosity masks to turn something that looks like this into something that looks like this. Now this is something that's very commonly used for landscape photography, but it really comes in handy for architectural photography and some other types of real estate exteriors. Now this is a more advanced approach to dealing with exterior shots, and so that's why typically it's used for the higher paying gigs. Now it's an easy thing to actually practice with because you just have to take an outside shot anywhere, bring it inside, bring it into Photoshop, and then go through these steps, and you'll see how you can do that. So much easier than trying to do something inside where you have to use flash. Now this is not the same as the luminosity blending mode that we use for interiors. That's completely different. If you're not familiar with that, that would be in the interiors book and also touched on in the lighting guide. If you're not familiar with my books, by the way, there's a link in the description for this video to all of that, and I'll mention a few things through it. You won't need any of those books for this particular tutorial, but if you're interested, you can go check that out. Anyways, this is a very simple process using some very complicated tools in Photoshop. So I'm going to simplify it as much as possible, go slowly through this so you can understand the steps involved without having to dig through all the science and all the various options that are there behind it. So anyways, let's dive right into this and see step by step how to use luminosity masks for architectural photography. Ready to get started? Let's go. Alright, so this is where we're going to get started, and you can see that this single shot here has some very strong highlights, which are over here off the water. We've got some very deep shadows here by the beach fish house, but we want to bring that out. Now the first thing you might think is, well, I could just do this in Lightroom by using a brush over here on highlights and maybe another brush over here for the shadows, but you'd be doing yourself a disservice as you would not be able to have as much control. You'll be able to have a lot more control dealing with this with luminosity masks. So let's get started with that. Now this is a TIFF, and if you know from the exteriors book and other videos, it's best with working with Adobe products to take your raw files, use your OEM software, and convert them into TIFFs first. So that's what's done here. What you do is you just go to the Channels tab over here. It's on your layers. And where it says RGB, you want to click on that mask, but first hold down the Control or the Command key if you're on Mac. So Control click here on that RGB icon. What it's done now is it's selected everything that was at 50% or brighter. So in other words, it's gathering the top half of all the bright stuff. Now this is fine, and if we wanted to use this to start working with off of our curves layer and what I'll be getting to here shortly, we can. The basis of it is that you would go to the Select menu and say Save Selection. And we'll call this at Highlights, and we'll call it 1, okay? Now that's fine. You can now just Control D to deselect that. At any time, you can then go down here and you see here's Highlights 1, there's its mask. So I could click on that, the Control click, boom, I've got now everything in that mask selected. Go up to Layers and do an adjustment layer. In this case, I'll add a Curves layer. Now that curves layer, when I create it, now has that layer mask created from what was detected when we did that Control click on that. This is a luminosity mask, and it's saved over here as the selection is Highlights 1. So now I can take the curves adjustment, and as I apply the curves adjustment, it'll only apply to that mask. So to bring down the highlights, you go up here near the top someplace and you start dragging that down. You could drag it down from here and you play around with it until you get those highlights down. But if you notice what's happening, there's a lot of other highlights that are being dragged down. Something I really don't care to have. I could delete that point too, didn't really want that. A little bit complicated use here of the curves layer. But anyways, you can see the pier is darkening up, and I really didn't want that because it's darkening up the highlights that are in that pier. And in that, sure enough, you can see some white that shows up on the pier. Now it's not darkening up any more of those shadows really that are over there by the beach fish house, maybe a little bit, but not a lot. So it's working fairly well, but it's still not refined enough to where we want it. So anyways, that's the concept, but I'm not going to use this layer. What I need to do is what's called an intersection. So I'm going to go back here to Channels, and I'm going to create a more refined luminosity mask. The first thing is to Control click on that highlights mask. So now we've got, once again, our 50% highlights selected. To refine this now, you do Control Alt Shift click. So once again, that's Control Alt Shift click. and you click in that mask, and you can see about half of those highlights went away. There's a lot fewer marching ants. We'll do that again, Control-Alt-Shift-Click, and it refines it even more. So now we're really getting out to where we're just getting the highlights that are over the water, into the sky. The pier isn't really showing up anymore. That's what we want. So now let's save this selection. So now we'll go to Select, and we'll save this selection, and we'll go to Highlights, and we'll just call that, I can't really spell this morning for some reason, Highlights 2. Okay, I don't think I still spelled that right. I didn't. It doesn't matter. You can go Control-D to deselect it. You can go off and do other editing, whatever you want to first. The nice thing is you have this luminosity mask to go back to. So anytime you want to start applying it, which is what we're going to do now, you go to Channels. We'll go to Highlights 2 and just Control-Click on the mask. Go over to Layers, create a new Curves Adjustment layer. So Layer, Adjustment Layer, and Curves. Now, as we drop our highlights, we'll notice that it's more refined. So we're dropping our highlights here by dragging this little section down, and sure enough, you can play around with where that should be. It's now darkening those highlights that are over the water. It's not really affecting the pier as much. So now we're getting a good drop in our highlights where we want to be. If you want to refine that further, by the way, first just click in the center here, and that's going to hold what's known as the gray point there, and then you can drop that further, and you're really now just affecting the most severe highlights. So that's a little bit advanced way to do it. Okay, so now we've got something that without it, we have bright highlights with it, we're able to tone down some of those highlights. And once again, at any point, you just can just go up here and adjust how much of the highlights you want to control. Now we need to do something with the shadows. It's very similar. Select that layer, go back to Channels, do a Control-Click on the RGB icon. Just like we did before, it now selected first the highlights that are 50% or greater. We want the dark portions, so we invert this by doing Control-Shift-I. Okay, now we've got all the darks selected. Let's save this selection. Go up to Select, Save Selection, and we'll call this Darks 1. Okay, that's good. But we want to refine that further. So to refine that further, you can then Control-Click on Darks 1, like that. And then we do our intersection, which is Control-Alt-Shift and click, Control-Alt-Shift-Click. You can see now it's selecting just the real dark areas, the super dark areas that are there. So that may be good enough for what we're going to do. So let's go over here then to Layers. And we'll add now another adjustment layer. We'll go up here to the top, and we'll go Layer, Adjustment Layer, Curves layer, and that's going to be for our darks. Now, once again, kind of similar to what we did before, let's just click in the center here to hold that gray point, and then the darks are down here in this corner. So you just bring those up a little bit. By bringing that little guy up, you can play around with where you want that and how much you want that to go. So without that mask, it's dark like this. With that layer, it's like that. And so you just control how much of that you want to reveal. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. So where we started with was this image, very dark, a little bit highlight. Now that we went here, we've got that type of refinement. And once again, you could even get rid of some of these other points. I'll go here to the top one here where it was dark. I went ahead and put that holding point in there, but I can adjust this in a number of different ways. You can see to bring out as much of the darks as I want. So that may look good right about there. So now what we can do is really finish this off by grouping all these layers together. You select them all, do a Control-J, right click on there, and now merge layers. Now you can apply all of your Lightroom presets or anything else you want to by just going up to the filter, camera raw filter, and then you can select your presets from here. So Photoshop has really come a long ways in doing this. So go to the presets. I have one that I like, I call exteriors. That may look good. Another one called pools. That's just a little bit dark. So we can start with exteriors, go back over here to the basic tab, and then start playing around with it. Maybe bring a little bit more vibrance out into the sky. We can bring up a little bit more clarity into it, whatever we want. And that looks pretty good. So we just say okay. So just a few other adjustments. So where did we start with? So this is after doing our luminosity mask and just a simple Lightroom preset and a few tweaks. This is what we started with though. So this is what we ended up with. Now, getting rid of this over here, a little bonus over here, that really bugged me. So especially for an architectural shoot. So all you have to do is you just grab like a lasso tool, and we're just going to do a ContentAware Fill. So we'll first grab this guy here and just go to Edit, Fill, and we're going to do a ContentAware Fill, and that should fill that in nicely, and it did, not too bad. And we'll do the same thing here while selecting around this little lamp that's stuck out there on us, and we'll do the same thing to Edit, Fill, ContentAware. Pretty good. All right, and then this little guy up here didn't quite get it, so we'll just take the clone brush real quick and we'll just fill him in there with some clouds. So not to sound like I'm sitting here just painting all day, but that's what you do. So anyways, now that we've got that, this is what we started with. We did some luminosity masks, did a few, just applied the presets to it, and of course our ContentAware Fill, and the final product looks like this. So I know a lot of that is a little advanced once we start getting into the luminosity masks and getting into the curves. So these are things that you can play around with and you can practice with, because once again, getting the footage to work in Photoshop with this is very simple. Just take your camera outside and take a picture. That's all that you have to worry about. The more blown out the highlights are, the better. The darker the shadows are, the better. So take a few different photos outside of anything and you can start practicing with this technique. You're not sure about curves? Make an adjustment layer and just play around with curves so you can see how that works. Now I can have another tutorial on using curves for various circumstances too. If you'd like that, just leave a comment for me and I'll take a look and see if I can come up with a tutorial just on the curves layer itself. Anyways, I hope this tutorial was useful for you and that you can use some of this in your photography as well. If you did like this video, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. It won't cost anything, and as soon as one of these videos is posted, you'll be the first to know. Thanks a lot for watching. Until next time, take care, be safe, and get out there and shoot something.